now. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of Democracy Talks, in which we share stories and hold discussions on issues concerning democratic prosperity or backsliding around the world. Today, we are joined by leader of the Red Kalina Relief Foundation, founder of the Warriors for Peace Theater, war veteran, actor, and peace advocate, Christopher Loverro. How's it going, Chris?
It's going good. Actually, one small clarification. Unfortunately, Sasha Sillin, my counterpart in Ukraine, I think he actually may be in transit right now to Ukraine. He's actually the co-founder of Red Kalina. I'm the founder of Warriors for Peace Theater, a nonprofit theater company here in Los Angeles. And I just got a hold of Natasha, who is the other co-founder of Red Kalina. She is currently in and out of Ukraine. So got a message to her to have Sasha call me. But like I said, I know he was heading back to Bakhmut to do evacuations. So we'll see if he joins us. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. And yeah, the reason I put leader, because I looked in the website looking for founders or positions and I didn't find it.
Yes.
I just thought leader was a safe word just to use to not assume anything. But thank you for the clarification. I want to ask first for yourself regarding your involvement. What is the Red Kalina Relief Foundation and how did your involvement in the organization come to be?
Great question. So Red Kalina is a grassroots Ukrainian-based organization. And what they do is they provide humanitarian relief for first responders, hospitals, orphanages, villages that have been victim of this savage, destruction. They also support the military, not with weapons or anything like that, but with food aid and medical supplies and things like that. So they're a grassroots, indigenous, Ukrainian humanitarian organization.
Sounds good. And how did you know about it? How did you get involved? How did that work?
Well, so it's interesting. I guess maybe we take a step back for a moment and talk about how I ended up there, and how, because that relates to how we crossed paths and started to collaborate. So like so many people, I was just watching the war unfold on TV. And a couple things became apparent really quick. One is that this is turning into genocide. And two, that the Ukrainians are going it alone. No one's going to help them. With aid and financial assistance and weapons, yes, but they're essentially fighting the Russian army alone. And so I'm a veteran, and like so many veterans, we felt the need to do something, because in a nutshell, I refuse to let evil win. So I kind of thought about, well, what are the assets that I could bring to the table? What skills or experience or background do I have that could assist in some way? And so some veterans went to go fight. Others, like myself, went to go assist in the humanitarian efforts. So I linked up with another veteran who I served in Iraq with, Juan Rodriguez, who had just come back from the area. And I said, hey, if you're going to go back, I'll go with you. This is a real offer. I was a civil affairs soldier in Iraq, which means I have extensive experience conducting humanitarian operations in an active combat zone. I was with a CA team attached to the 2nd Infantry Division in Mosul. And essentially what we do is we conduct humanitarian operations within our battle space. So I decided, I can probably be an asset. Our philosophy is you want to help, not hinder. You want to be an asset, not a liability. So we kind of did a self-reflection and decided, yep, we could find a way to help. So like a lot of US veterans, we just kind of went. And when we got there, we just started to network, and we met Sasha and Natasha and started working with their relief group based out of Lviv. But we went all over. So we went to Bucha, which you probably heard about. Bucha was one of the first cities that was liberated, and we realized that the Russians were just committing mass atrocities, murdering civilians, executing people, using rape as a terror weapon, just destroying whole towns and villages. So we would deliver food aid there and to some of the surrounding areas there. And then that kind of evolved into delivering medical supplies around the country. And Sasha and I teamed up with Global Augmentation and Base UA, and we were doing evacuations of people trying to flee Bakhmut, which is probably been in the news quite a bit. It's very kinetic. It's one of the most, it's one of the most, well, it's one of the most contested cities in Iraq. So it's getting shelled 100 to 200 times a day. The Wagner group, the Chechens, and the Russian army are all kind of converging on Bakhmut, and they're fixated on taking it. So it's being absolutely destroyed. And so there's a lot of civilians trying to flee the area, and we're part of the teams that are getting them out.
Thank you for sharing that. So you're talking about atrocities. You mentioned terror tactics. I would like to ask you, because I have been taught and I believe that the power of stories is immeasurable. With stories, you're able to share many things that are happening and are able to connect with others so they understand the gravity of many situations. So I would like to ask you, what are some stories that you would like to share about your humanitarian work in Ukraine, what you have done? What are some stories that come to mind that you think are important for any audience to hear?
Well, let me kind of address that kind of from the macro and the micro level. So big picture, there's a few things that I just wanted to just get out, which is, and then I'll get into personal stories. So there's a few things that people that we want people to know, which is, one, this is a genocide, right? Oftentimes people are reluctant to use the word genocide because it can be overused, and if it's overused, it loses its meaning. But this is absolutely genocide. Literally, it fits all the legal criteria for genocide. It is the systematic destruction of a civilian population. So that's one thing that's very important to people to realize the gravity of what's happening. The Russians suck at fighting a modern military, but what they're good at is terrorizing and bombing and destroying civilians. And they are systematically destroying civilian infrastructure, as well as housing, apartments, homes, hospitals, nurseries. I've seen with my own eyes nurseries that were targeted. So this is genocide. So that's one thing that it's important to kind of get out. And then there's also a couple stories that are related to the war that maybe aren't being focused on, but one is the fact that the Russians are essentially kidnapping en masse, mostly women and children, and forcing them to come back they're basically kidnapping hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of Ukrainians and taking them back to Russia. So there's the kidnapping of a large segment of the population. And the other thing, and I'm sure you are pretty savvy, being a Cal student, go Bears. One of the other effects of the war is the millions and millions of people that are starving, on the verge of starvation, and will die as a direct result of the grain and other blockades of food by the Russian army. The World Food Program gets, I think, 40% of their grain from Ukraine. I think the UN estimates well over almost 350 million people are worldwide are on the verge of starvation, and they rely on this grain coming from Ukraine, which they can't get. So those are the bigger picture items. But as far as stories go, I mean, I was there for about 4 months. I was 4 months off and on since April. And so I worked and lived with the Ukrainians, and as well as the military, and not in a fighting, not in the fighting aspect, but in the humanitarian aspect. So, one of the things that I can tell you is the spirit and the resolve of the Ukrainians is unstoppable. It's inspirational. They are winning this war, and they will defeat the Russian army. There's just simply no other outcome. And there's a lot of reasons why. We could talk about how completely incompetent and corrupt and savage the Russian army is. We could talk about all the aid coming from the West, especially the United States. All of those are factors, but ultimately the reason Ukraine is going to win this war is because of the spirit, not just of the military, but of the civilians. So you go there and you can see the entire civilian population has mobilized. So civil society has stepped up. So everybody pretty much is contributing to the war effort, whether you're in uniform or not. And it is amazing to see how these folks will not be subjugated. They will not be dominated. They will fight till the end, and they will win. And as far as just some highlights of the encounters and experiences I've had, for one, just the unbelievable bravery of the civilians. All right. So I'm a combat veteran, right? I served in the Army. I was also a police officer. I was on a SWAT team. But I worked with these civilians, young Ukrainian civilians, doing these evacuations out of Bakhmut, which is absolutely terrifying. And, our team leader, Roman, 23 years old. I think he was a filmmaker, no military experience, no law enforcement experience. Don't know if he's ever even fired a gun. And he was our team leader, leading a bunch of veterans and civilians to do these evacuations in one of the most dangerous cities in Ukraine. And this guy is absolutely fearless. So let me just give you one. Hey, is that you, Sasha? Nice. You're on mute, brother. Maybe you're on mute by design. So he asked me to tell a personal story. So I'm going to talk about you in a second. So I'll just give you one tidbit, right? So we get our intel, and we're constantly updating our intel, because if you take a wrong turn in Bakhmut, you're dead, right? You're captured. So you have to go through a series of checkpoints, military checkpoints. And once we get past one of these checkpoints, we pull over and we put on all of our body armor, our helmet, our bulletproof vest, and all of that. And as we're doing this, we get a message from the radio, an urgent message that, hey, the Russians just destroyed 2 Ukrainian tanks right where you're going. And so just matter of factly, I said, oh, okay, I guess we have to abort, because, yeah, they're blowing up tanks right where we're going. So, right, we abort. And so I looked over, and there's this American medic on the evacuation team, Kevin, and he's just kind of like leaning against the van, and he goes, well, I mean, I'd still like to go. And I just looked at him, and I had to process, like, wait a minute, you still want to go? We're not going to abort? They're blowing up tanks right where we're going, and we're not going to abort. And then I look at Roman, and he, basically, yeah, I think we should still go. And, Kevin said, there are still people there who need to get out. And this is just what we signed up for. And I just realized, I mean, first of all, it was inspirational to see that level of bravery and fearlessness. And so we went. And that's just one example of, it's not that they're fearless, because we're all scared shitless when we're there, but it's the ability they have to push through the fear and continue the mission, despite the fact that we're driving into a town that's actively being shelled. And so that's just one example of the unbelievable bravery of the Ukrainian civilians. And again, as a military guy and a police officer, I am inspired by the level of bravery that you see throughout Ukraine by civilians. And I'm going to do a quick introduction of my counterpart, Sasha. So Sasha is another great example, right? So I'm old, so I refer to him as a kid. He's not a kid. But so he was born in Ukraine, Ukrainian, was living in London. And when the war happened, what does he do? Goes to the nearest embassy and tries to sign up to go fight. My country's being invaded. I'm going to go. Sasha has no military experience, never fired a gun. But he's like, I'm going to go fight the Russian army. And so I spent 4 months with him in Ukraine, driving around to these, in some cases, active combat zones. And again, absolutely fearless. Well, not fearless, scared as shit like we all are, but just willing to push through that fear and do whatever it takes to help his people. Yes,
Thank
Sasha,
you.
you literally are one of the bravest people I know, and I've been in the military.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi. Apologies. Fashionably late as always. Yeah.
No, it's all good, Sasha. I know Chris already gave an introduction of you, a really good one, by the way. I would like one like that one day. But Sasha, if you would like to introduce yourself, who are you? Why are you in Ukraine? And what drives you, Sasha?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yeah, thanks for interviewing us. I guess a quick summary. I've had to do many of these because my life is so convoluted. I was born in Ukraine. When I was 5, I moved to America. When I was 12, I moved to London, and I've been there ever since. I'm in London now. Tomorrow morning, I'm going back to Ukraine. So it's just having my last evening here before I go. So yeah, so I'm Ukrainian. Was born in Ukraine. I have a Ukrainian, However, I'm a Russian speaker. I was raised in a Russian speaking environment. For me, Ukraine was a Russian speaking environment until recently. I was christened in a Russian Orthodox church. To be honest, I didn't really connect to any kind of Ukrainian identity. Only I kind of lost that when I was a kid because I was exposed to America, and I kind of had this, I guess you could call it, identity crisis. And it only kind of occurred to me in 2014 when I was standing with my father in Maidan Square on the New Year's of 2013 of 14 behind the mixing desk because he was the sound engineer, and seeing this whole historical revolution unfold before my eyes. It was it definitely rekindled something in me, and I guess the years after that was just me kind of coming to terms with it. So when the war started, I knew I had no choice but to get as involved with it as was feasibly possible. I have, I like I like doing different things, and I just come back from Haiti, so I was in between things. So it's not that it took away too much of my own personal life. In fact, it was quite easy to make Ukraine a focal point of my life. Once it came to that, but it's just something that's happened in one day, and it's changed all our lives forever. Just in that one day, and in that one moment that you hear, oh, okay, tanks are, they're shelling, okay. You kind of, for me personally, I know that's it. My fate is sealed. This is what I'm going to be working on. Some people, don't get that. Even some Ukrainians, they just prefer to stay at home and pretend like the war doesn't happen until it flies through their, bedroom window. It happens, but yeah, so basically, here's kind of my story since I'm on monologue mode. Yes, as Chris said, I went to the embassy. I think it was a consulate or the embassy. Try to sign up. They directed me to the nearest draft office in Ukraine once I got to the Ukraine, because they assumed I was a Ukrainian citizen. Now, what I found out later, and kind of when I had a conversation with my family, is that it's not very pragmatic for me to try to join a legion, because a legion is comprised of professional soldiers who do this for a living. I would need training to do this, so it wouldn't be, perhaps a different way would be better. And obviously, my family's pressure, not wanting me to die also had a part in that, of course. But I kind of, I was even teetering on whether I should go to Ukraine or not, because I didn't want to impede the, what we were doing. But I eventually decided, yes, I'll go. And I went and got to Ukraine, started working in one warehouse, met a woman called Natasha, who seemed to be doing kind of parallel projects to that. She wasn't, she was part of the core group, as you would say, but she was, lots of people were bringing stuff in and just using the warehouse as a kind of focal point. So with Natasha, I just kind of, I liked her vibe, even though she yells at me a lot, and we work kind of like clockwork. Uh,
Oh, Sasha, your connection froze.
I can maybe fill in a little bit till he comes back.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, you can go ahead and fill in.
I mean, I could. So Natasha is the co-founder of Red Kalina, and again, it goes back to the spirit that these folks have, and their willingness to just do whatever it takes. I was filling in for you. I was starting to talk about Natasha, but you're back, so take it from there, brother.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my friend's hotspot right now. So basically, yeah, Natasha's husband is a volunteer to the territorial defense in Lviv, same as my father actually, but he was sent about a month earlier to Luhansk, back when we still had Luhansk. I think Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, around these parts. My dad was sent to Kharkiv, right north of Kharkiv, next to Zolochiv, facing the Russian border. So yeah, so Natasha has, her, she has 2 kids. She used to have a job in the tourist industry, so she has a lot of contacts back from there. She's very very down to earth and a very rational kind of person. She's religious, which is interesting. I guess it complements that kind of, straightforward rationality. But and she considers herself Russian, which is the funniest thing. She is one of the most patriotic Ukrainians I'll ever have met up to this point, but she considers herself Russian. We speak Russian, so I guess it kind of adds to the paradoxes that kind of populate this phenomenon called war, which sucks.
Hey,
by the
Sasha,
way.
can I interject just one thing real quick? So Natasha, I want to bring this up real quick just because it's the role of women in this war. So much, there are women in the, obviously in the military, there are women fighting, but there's so many women leaders like Natasha who just step up, and they form these grassroots organizations, and they're going to, we went on a couple missions to Bucha. She goes to the areas to deliver aid wherever it's needed, even if it's near the front. And I just wanted to kind of, make that point that there's so many women leaders in Ukraine, not just leaders, but just women participating in the war effort, including going to areas that are extremely dangerous. And it's just, again, it just pays testimony to how the entire civil society has mobilized, and how significant the role of women has been in this war.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That's really important. So I heard the mention of Bucha a lot of times, and I heard Chris, you mentioned terror tactics being used and all that. So I wanted to ask, how does the battlefield look like? Like, have you met any Ukrainian soldiers? What does their daily life, their new reality look like now? I wanted to ask that to both of you to have our audience understand the gravity of what's happening in Ukraine, what the situation is, and how you said, Chris, it's genocide. It is war, and there needs to be action now. So you can go ahead and you can start with the question.
Well, so let's just talk about Bucha. You know, again, it was the first or one of the first cities liberated where we realized the level of savagery of the Russian army. They are a stain on humanity. They are in fact focusing all their terror on the civilian population. They're losing when a typical bully, when you're losing a fair fight, what do? You pick on someone smaller. So it is literally Russian doctrine strategy to try and terrorize the civilian population in order to try and break their will, which of course, as we talked about, will never happen. You cannot break the will of the Ukrainians. But so their attitude is, well, we haven't broken their will by bombing the cities, so I guess we just have to bomb them even more. But Bucha is it's an acute example of, you know, you have a military unit going in and at will raping and murdering civilians, raping women in front of their families, raping children, executing families hiding in their basements. And, you know, visually, I was there right after it got liberated, and parts of it just look like Armageddon. It looks like something from a Mad Max movie. I mean, you have whole sections of the town that are essentially rubble. And it's just hard to really put into words the level of depravity and savagery and evil, frankly, that this army, and we see it every day in the news. What are we seeing every day in the news? Russians sent another 100 missiles into Ukraine and they're bombing. And, you know, you keep hearing this word civilian infrastructure, but it's more than that. It's apartment buildings, it's houses, it's schools, hospitals. They are trying to destroy the civilian population. This is not propaganda. This is not a slant in any particular news channel. This is reality. And Bucha is just one example. We escorted a medic out of Bucha early on who was there in the battle to retake it. And he was saying, yeah, it was just, you see civilians on the street, just executed with their hands tied behind their backs. Whole families executed in basements. It's just a level of savagery that is really shocking. But it's happening. And that, I mean, so sorry, Sasha, what's your take on not necessarily Bucha, but
Yeah, well, I mean, it's you know, I have friends from Bucha. Yeah, it's kind of hard to you know, to kind of believe, but you know, the whole idea of the apocalypse is kind of, it's already here in certain places. You know, there's I guess, to go back to your original question, like, what is the life of a soldier like? What does the battlefield look like? The battlefield looks like it, towns and countrysides and forests and steppes, highways. The daily life as a soldier right now is that they are very cold. They're very cold. As far as I know, there's a bit less snow in the past few days and maybe the past week, but it's a lot colder here than it is in Europe, and it's tends to be colder the more east you go, especially the more northeast you go. It's to kind of I guess to describe the spirit of the people, to kind of get it from that angle. The spirit of the soldiers is It's like patriotism, but it's not even patriotism, because you could go to a point where you lose all patriotism and then still keep going, because this it's not an ideology that Ukrainians follow. It's just basic survival. And I guess that's the main difference between why Russians are doing it and why Ukraine's doing it. Russians are doing it because there's a certain doctrine behind, okay, they're pawns of the, NATO West that wants to, destroy us, and that's why we have to go. That because they're all Satanists or neo-Nazis. They have an ideology that they're following, even though it's very kind of schizoid and all over the place, Frankenstein together from all sorts of horrible stuff. But Ukrainians, it's like, especially ones on the front, especially like soldiers that, some of whom are, don't have, are homeless because their houses are under occupation. Um, for them is just survival. It's just there's no life. You could go to sleep, you can sleep it off after the war ends. Before that, we are doing nothing. And believe me, it will take a few nukes for Ukraine to be subdued into any kind of situation where they have to compromise either their territory or their sovereignty. At least a few.
Yeah, and we know, we have friends who are literally living and fighting in the muddy, freezing trenches right now.
Yeah.
There
Yeah,
are
it's
pictures there are pictures of World War I trench warfare juxtaposed with pictures of guys in the trenches right now, and you almost can't tell them apart.
Yeah, it's really horrible how, I guess, history goes in circles. That the war to end all wars. Well, we really hope this will be at least a war to end all wars between Russia. That's at least as far as we could go from there. And we have to win this. We have to win this, and we almost see a necessity for it. We can't let Putin keep being in power. That's, I guess, the main thing, because it's always going to be on a stain on him unless he gets lobotomized. There's no way that he's not going to see this as a threat to him, and he's going to want to keep going. And it's very sad because it's just kind of almost one person. Obviously the whole system is what's keeping him in power, and he's kind of stuck in the middle, almost like he doesn't know what's going on. He's just pushed in there by the forces of nature, like Hitler or whatever. But still, there's he's still an entity, he's still a person, he still wants to live, he still wants to not die under the weight of his own myth. So there are some ways we could take advantage of that. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of rambling. I kind of went off topic. I apologize.
No, you did not. Just thank you both so much for sharing this. And I do want to say, for the Ukrainian soldiers, I mean, for what I'm hearing, it's
brutal.
No, it's yeah, like
brutal.
yeah. I can help to get like a little emotional and concerned, thinking about what's happening there, and just how, and not only just how important it is for Ukraine, for its sovereignty and for its freedom and for its people, but also for the world and its future. If you let evil win now, if you let Putin win now, what precedent are we living for the future? What precedent are we leaving for my future children when I have children? I don't want them to be in a future in which Putin had won, and in which the world allowed Putin to win. So it's insane what you're telling me. It's insane.
Yeah, this is
there's a really all right. There's a really good Thomas Paine quote, which says, "If trouble comes, let it come in my lifetime, so it doesn't come in my children's lifetime," or something like that. I like that.
Yeah, it's really about what kind of world do we want to live in, right? Do we want to live in a world where we continue to let dictators take by force what they want, or as a world community, at least the democracies, do we want to make our stand? And I see this as we're making our stand, because I don't see this just as a war between Ukraine and Russia. I really do see this as a war between good and evil. a war between democracy and dictatorship, a war to see what the world order is going to be. That's why Russia cannot win this war. The West has to unite and stay united as long as it takes for Russia to be defeated. And, you know, there's something else that's kind of, I think Sasha and I are both passionate about this. You will oftentimes hear subject matter experts, politicians, government officials talking about, well, you know, Ukraine needs to come to the negotiation table. All wars end with negotiation. You know, we can't keep this going because at what cost? And frankly, it infuriates me when I hear this, because nobody decides Ukrainian sovereignty except for the Ukrainians. Nobody. When the Ukrainians, who are the ones fighting and dying and having their country destroyed, when they have decided enough is enough, then it's time to negotiate. But even the United States, who has been the biggest partner and provided the most aid, just because we have helped Ukraine gives us no entitlement to influence what they do or when they come to the negotiation table. It's up to the Ukrainians and only the Ukrainians to decide when that happens.
Sasha, would you like to
Yeah,
pitch
I
in
think,
this on the same lane?
No, go on.
No, would you like to pitch in? I was going to say, like, on the same part of what democracies around the world have to do, what action needs to happen in order to stop this bloodshed, stop this genocide, this war.
Well, I think there's something to be said for the fact that so many countries have come to Ukraine's aid, and it's not just one country that has like some sort of, it's not like just Poland or the United States. It's the whole world really chipping in what they can, because this is a fight that people understand, because it is in beyond all its complexities, the basic structure, fireworks, Ukraine. But yeah, the basic structure of this war is very simple. Even though it's hundreds of years old, even though it's, there's wars happening everywhere. There's a horrible war happening in Yemen that's happened for a while. They had a ceasefire that just stopped recently. Ethiopia is getting really hard hit by a war, especially from the fact that there's no more Ukrainian, or at least there was no more Ukrainian grain coming through there. So they're having a horrible time. And, you know, there's places all around the world that are really suffering at the hands of somebody else who's not letting them live like in a way that we want, which is, you know, peace. That's I guess the foundation of what people actually want, but beyond, you know, cultures and beyond cultures and countries, we all want peace. We all want to live in a world where we could live our lives without getting bombed. However, some countries still have leaders that are fueled with ideologies that summon ghosts from the past, that bring about this kind of like myth that's pregnant with bloodshed. And this is what Putin has stepped into. It's almost like, I was having this conversation with my mom, actually. It's like, you know, Putin, maybe he's not a madman, maybe he's not a psychopath in that kind of sense. Maybe he's just a typical Russian leader. And this is just what Russian leaders go through, because this is just a phenomenon of Russia existing as a state. It just seems to keep constantly producing mass murdering, genocide, you know, perpetuators. It's almost in the history. And I don't want to necessarily, you know, be, you know, Russophobic. I knew that's a new word, but however, it's an kind of an empirical thing, you know. And I've met some great Russians. I have Russian friends, you know. I speak Russian. I have Russian in me. However, it's just it's a thing. We used to be one country, the Kievan Rus. Before Russia was Russia, it was Rus. RUS, and this capital was in Kiev. And because of that split, we've never been able to rectify the split that's between us. And we've, ever since then, we've been the little brother and they've been the big brother, telling us, little Russia, we used to be little Russia. Well, it's a conflict that's older than the Irish conflict, than the Irish English conflict. And for it to come to kind of culmination like this, it's kind of, people have been talking about this thing happening for hundreds of years, because there would be a time when there would be, and it's happened several times in the past, even like 100 years, Ukraine has stepped up and tried to drive out its Russian influence. And only now, from a full-fledged war, we can actually really gain our freedom, because we didn't really have our freedom before, the same way that, Haitians don't have freedom now, or the Yemenis don't have freedom now. It will only come when we have sovereignty over our own land and peaceful skies, and are just able to live our lives. That's the basic bit of it.
Thank you both for sharing these answers. And now that we've talked about, government, about Putin, about other democracies around the world, I want to ask about the people. What would you like to tell our audience that they can do to help Ukraine, to help your humanitarian work? What organizations can they go to? Where can they call? What can they do? So if you could please provide this answer so we can hopefully get some people to action to help.
Sasha, you want me to start?
Yeah.
So on that point, I think it's important to just state that, there are a lot of problems in the world right now. Natural disasters, famines, conflict. When we were in Ukraine, someone said, hey, we're having trouble getting some donors because there's so much other stuff going on in the world because of what's going on in Somalia and Pakistan. And so we were like, what's going on in Somalia and Pakistan? So we started Googling, there's the flood in Pakistan and the famine in Somalia. And so, we often want to always say, hey, look, this is not a zero-sum game, right? The world needs to step up and help Ukraine, but we also understand that there are epic problems around the world. And if you can help in some way with those conflicts and those natural disasters or whatever the problems are, you should, right? We're not saying only help us, we're saying help everybody, right? So, I mean, that's just one thing that I wanted to get out there is we fully acknowledge that there are other problems in the world, and we fully support people who help those issues. The thing that makes this a little bit different is that, as horrible as a flood is, that flood isn't going to make that country disappear, right? If Ukraine loses this war, Ukraine no longer exists. The Ukrainians are fighting for their very existence. If they lose this war, there's no more Ukraine as a sovereign, independent nation state. It won't exist anymore. So they're fighting for their very existence. They're fighting for their very lives. And again, we're fighting for the global order right now, right? It's not just a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's so much more than that. But to answer your question, two things, right? Obviously, Sasha and I work for organizations, and we'll give you the websites and talk briefly about that. But the other thing is just help the world sift through all the bullshit and the propaganda. Keep this conflict in people's minds, talk about it, blog about it, write about it, talk to your representatives. Don't let this go away. It's so critical that we continue to support Ukraine in their efforts to, try and survive. So I'll briefly talk about my organization, then Sasha will talk about Red Colina. So I have a 501c3 nonprofit in Los Angeles. It's actually a theater company, Warriors for Peace Theater. We use the theater arts to help veterans reintegrate and the arts are very cathartic. So veterans with PTSD, a lot of combat veterans will come participate in our work. And we also kind of have a social, we like to have social impact in what we do. So we also are about promoting diversity in the arts and empowering women in the arts and using the arts as a bridge to bring different communities together. So, you could always support us. Our website is wfptheater.com. But I'll let Sasha talk about Red Kalina, because that's another organization that's on the ground doing the work. And one thing I just want to note is our organizations, the people that we work with, every penny that anyone donates to these organizations goes 100% to the actual work. There's no overhead, there's no salaries, there's no marketing, no one gets paid. Everyone's a volunteer. So every penny goes to where you think it's going to go. Whereas most organizations, if you donate $1, maybe 20 cents actually goes to relief, and the rest goes to people's salaries and bureaucracy and bullshit. And there's also another organization, I don't have the website, but Global Augmentation. They're the nonprofit that's doing the evacuations out of Bakhmut and other frontline areas that Sasha and I were both on their evacuation teams. So Global Augmentation is another organization that you could support. But Sasha, tell us about Red Kalina.
Yeah, Red Kalina is based in Lviv. Sorry about that. We deliver medical supplies, clothes and uniforms, tactical gear, food, hygiene, all that good stuff to civilians and military. We make sure that, basically, we run a very small but very efficient company, and this is very good for us because it allows us to be right up front and personal with what we're doing. So whereas other organizations would give, bulk things to, certain individuals, hoping that, they, do best, we actually know who we work with, because who we work with is our friends and our family, because we're Ukrainians, we're here, we know the people on the front, we call them, we ask them, what is it like, what can you, very nice, Chris, what could you what could we do, really, like, no bullshit, like we sit down because we really want to get to the real grain of how we can help in the most maximal way. And that's just the course that we've been going at. We've revised our strategy many times, and it's just about adapting. Right now it's winter, so we're in winter mode. I can't wait to go back tomorrow. It's gonna be a new experience, but it's about maximizing your output in terms of how much help you're doing. And that's, you can only really know if you talk to the soldiers and you have a real no bullshit conversation. Is like, okay, bulletproof vests, do people really need bulletproof vests? And they can say yes or no. And anyway, so my organization, Red Kalina, www.redkalinarelief.org is my organization. It's actually Natasha's organization, but I thought of the name, I made the website. So
Okay, well,
we're like, yeah,
well, sounds good. Well, thank you both very much. This is our first Democracy Talks. Get it? Democracy Talks, Democracy Hawks. Pretty cool. I came up with that. So thank you so much for being here and joining us. I'm really excited. Oh, Chris, you have something to say?
I got one thing to say.
Go ahead.
And this is for you and your fellow students, and for that matter, everybody. But this war in Russia and in Ukraine, it's scary, it's epic, it's this big monster. But whether it's a Russian invasion, or whether it's famine in Somalia, or floods in Pakistan, or whatever it is, always know that you personally, as a single individual, absolutely can make a difference. You can. We're seeing it play out in Ukraine right now. Like, individuals are just going, and they're making a huge impact. So, just never concede that you as a single person can't make a difference in these epic problems in the world, because you can. And I just want that to be your mantra. Like I can make a difference, and all you have to do is make the choice to do so.
Yep.
Wow.
Not you, Sasha. I'm not talking about you. Remember I said be an asset, not a liability? Well,
Everything's about me.
that's right. You are the legend.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, well, thank you both again so much. We're really grateful to have you as our first official guest. You are heroes. You're the definition of what a hero is. And I would like to just, as a person, just thank you for the work that you do. And I cannot wait to see what else you accomplish. So thank you both so much. And you have
We're
a
honored.
fantastic rest of your days.
Our
Thank you.
honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.